Hey everyone, Board Game Brody here with Let's Table It, where we get games to the table, like Vrahode Age of Prophecy here by Weathervane Games. You will be adventuring across the overlands and the underlands and the oceans of Vrahode, and the details of your adventures are contained in these encounter maps here, and they will guide you through, and they will serve as a vehicle for your story and help you visualize these important locations. Some quests will have multiple parts, like doing this before going on to do another part. Make sure that you play them in order. So let's set this bad boy up. Here we go. Each player will choose a hero by taking its hero card, and then with the information on the card can search through the gear and the skill decks to find the listed cards that hero will start with. So here I have Aldira, and I start with a short sword, simple studded armor, and a wooden shield. Each hero has a dashboard that includes their player board, and it is placed on top of the plastic dashboard. You will place your stat cubes for each stat on the value shown on your card. Boom. See? Easy like that. Then you have 4 white action pegs and 2 red action pegs and stat modifier cubes that will be added along this left edge as your stats change and get affected while you're playing the game. The decks for the regional and basic items should be shuffled separately and placed next to the treasured items deck. Initiative tokens from each player are placed in the bag, and everything else is left nearby to possibly use while you play through the game. Now, knowing and understanding your hero's dashboard is important, as this will help you figure out how your hero actually functions. Right here is the backpack slot, which can hold up to 10 items from the various items that you may gain while playing through the game, and only 1 heavy item is allowed in those 10 items. When items are here, they are not considered equipped, but rather stored. Your items that you start the game with will most likely be equipped if you are able to do so. Items that are equipped are in this slot here on the right. You can wear as many items as there is space for, which is 1 space for your torso, which would be like an armor or a robe, 1 space for your waist, which would be like a belt, 1 space for your head, which would be like a helm or a mask, 3 spaces for your hands, which could be gloves, hand wraps, or a single 2-handed weapon, a single instrument, a shield, or a weapon, or 2 dual-wielded weapons, 1 space for your back, which could be like a cape, 1 space for your neck, which could be a pendant or an amulet, 1 space for your eyes, which could be lenses, 1 space for a brooch, 2 spaces for your wrists, which could be bracelets, 1 per wrist, and 2 spaces for your fingers for rings, 1 for each hand. So again, your starting items will be placed here to begin. Some heroes have role restrictions that might, restrict equipping certain items. This will be listed on that hero card, but those items can be stored in the backpack to be used later by another player if you come across some of those items while you play through the game. Here are 5 stat trackers, which are the skills each hero has, and these never get adjusted. Body in red, spirit in purple, mind in blue, focus in green, and presence in gold. To their sides are the stat modifiers whenever you need to go up or down because of the maybe afflictions or enhancements. This is the stat modifier cube that you will use, and that goes from +3 to -3. Sometimes these might also remain empty depending on the scenario that you're playing. Now, this slot here is where you will place your hero card. These other 5 slots are for skill cards for each of the 5 skill areas. Again, body, spirit, mind, focus, and presence. Players will find their starting skills on the front of their hero card, listing the skill area first, followed by the skill name. These are located in the skill deck. You will retrieve your starting skills and place them in their corresponding slots. Again, for me, with Aldira, I would get Feral Charge, Blade of the Warlord, and Frenzied Blood. This is what's called the available rule tray. That holds the small clear crystals that represent a hero's current available rule with which to power your skills. All heroes will start with 6 of these total, 2 rule for each skill. This other tray is where you spin your rule, so when using skills during play, you will use your crystals and they will be placed over in this tray over here. Resting will help return the crystals back to the available tray here on the left. This is your life tracker here, and it provides a persistent reminder of a hero's wounds compared to their maximum life. There is a single-digit row and a double-digit row. This is the movement tracker. Here you can see how many spaces you can move on your turn. Some things in the game might affect your movement, and you will move these pegs here when that happens. This is your fatigue tracker. In this game, fatigue can be one of the most challenging enemies. A peg is used here to track how fatigued or tired that you are. This is the mitigation tracker. It's the level of protection that you receive because of your gear or your skills or other things that you might collect to help you with your defense. The higher it is, the better protected you are. A white peg is used here to track all your total mitigation. Lastly, this is the skills tracker, and the number of skills you have can increase over time. You begin with 3 skills, and hopefully it will go up. This also determines how much maximum rule that you can hold. Now, the cool thing about this game is that at the end of each session, you can place your hero cards flat on your dashboard, and then there will be a clear cover to place on top to save your hero's progress. So you will be able to save your progress in the game as you play through it. Okay, so let's now go to the encounter map. Here, it is all set up. The blue and gold icon with a shield and crossed swords represents the spawn site for the heroes. That's you. And the red animal paw is the spawn location for the enemy. Since there is one spawn location for the heroes, one hero will be placed on it and the other placed adjacent to it. Similarly, with enemies, you will set up the same way with one on top of the paw icon and the others adjacent to it. If there's a second scenario on that same map, then the heroes will continue wherever they are at on the map when going into that next scenario, so you won't need to use those spawn sites again. On the right side of the scenario banner, there might be, at times, an icon present. If there is none present, this means that as soon as all heroes and enemies and ally miniatures are placed out on the map, then initiative tokens are drawn and the game starts. But if there is a star icon present, this means that the heroes and their allies, they get to draw initiative tokens and take one turn prior to any of the enemies. Now, if a player attacks an enemy within range, as soon as an attack is launched, successful or not, a fresh round of initiative tokens are then drawn, and combat proceeds in that order. If this fist icon is present, this means that regardless of the number of turns, as soon as a hero and their allies engage an enemy in any way, like moving adjacent to it or attacking them, a fresh round of initiative tokens are then drawn. And if a curved arrow symbol is present, this means that as soon as a hero or their ally steps onto a space on the map with the matching symbol, then a fresh round of initiative tokens are drawn and combat proceeds normally after that. This usually denotes like a transition from the first to a second part of an adventure that shares that same map. So once setup is done, all units, both heroes and enemies, each draw a token from the bag. These are numbered from 1 through 12 and will indicate the order of play for that round. Play proceeds from the lowest to the highest number. Heroes do have the option to spend 2 fatigue to change their initiative order to any unused token number. This needs to be done before anyone else has acted. And if another player wants to take another player's or hero's initiative spot, both players can increase their fatigue by 2 and do so. Now the battle begins and the players continue in order of initiative and will return their token to the bag after they perform their turn. And for the next round, initiative tokens are again drawn, and this happens over and over again until the battle is over. So on your turn, you will have 2 turn points to do stuff like move, use an item, perform a physical attack, use a skill, or a racial ability. You do not need to use both turn points, but during a turn, you can only perform 1 physical attack, or skill, or racial ability. Sometimes a player will have a persisting skill or an ability, and that does not count towards that for this turn. The exceptions to performing more than one physical attack is this. A hero can perform 2 ranged attacks, or 2 unarmed melee attacks, or 2 melee attacks with 2 dual-wielded weapons, or a weapon and a shield. And if doing this, you cannot do anything else, and you can choose to attack 1 or 2 enemies, but you must declare a valid target prior to making the attack success roll. So let's talk about the basics of combat. Units can move up to the number of spaces indicated on their cards. Movement can happen at the beginning or at the end of a turn, but can't be split among other actions. If you don't use all of your movement, then you forfeit the remaining. Everyone can also begin or end their movement on a diagonal of 1 square, but all movement that must be orthogonal except for that. Heroes and allies can move through spaces occupied by other friendlies, but may not end a movement on a space where someone else is at. Enemies can do the same with other enemy units. If flying, you can go through spaces occupied by other friends or enemies, but just not ending your movement on a space with someone else present there. Non-flying units can leap over 1 space during their movement at the cost of 1 movement point. This means they can leap over 1 space of difficult terrain or water without paying the movement penalty for entering into it. The squares with a dashed line on the map are considered difficult terrain and cost 2 movement points to enter into those. Squares with a solid line are impassable, even for the flying units. And if a square has more than half water, it's considered a water square, and it costs 3 movement points to enter into those. Those native to the ocean are exempt from that penalty and treat water terrain just like normal terrain. Now, when attacking, you will note your damage value on your weapon card. This is used for basic attacks. An enemy will then have a mitigation value shown on their card. These values will help you to know the total amount of damage that you will inflict when you attack that unit. To attack, you must be in range, announce a target enemy, and then if performing a melee attack, you must be adjacent, either orthogonally or diagonal to that enemy. If performing a ranged attack, you will count the squares the same as movement to determine if they are in range. You will then perform 2 dice rolls, the success roll with a d20 and the modifier roll with a d6. These 2 dice can be rolled at the same time. First, you will need to determine if you succeed by looking at the success roll, which is the d20. You succeed if your roll is equal to or less than the applicable stat. If you roll higher, then you failed. You will use your body stat with melee attacks and your focus for ranged attacks, and you will compare it with the value that you rolled. And then next, if successful, the player will add or subtract the results from the d6 from the base damage value of that hero's weapon. The one attack that doesn't have a modifier is when bashing with an equipped shield. You either will hit or you will miss without using the modifier. And then remember the mitigation. You will deduct the enemy's mitigation value from the attack score. Heroes have armor to help with mitigation, but sometimes enemies might not. But they have, hair, hide, scales, or feathers. So know that enemy mitigation values will differ greatly between different units. Remember, a success attack can never be mitigated below a 1 damage. So if successful, it will always count as at least 1 damage. If the success roll of the physical attack is a value of 1, the hero achieved a critical hit. They will perform the modifier, but will not subtract the enemy's mitigation value when rolling a critical hit. If a player rolls a 20, this is always a miss, regardless of any modifiers or adjustments from any source. Now, the skills are usually the most powerful attacks or actions a hero can perform. Rule crystals can be spent to perform a skill on any turn and sometimes outside of the turn-based encounters. Enemy mitigation is performed differently with skills, as the skill card itself will specify if it can be mitigated or not. Some skills don't inflict damage, but might help remove wounds or reduce fatigue or increase movement, and some skills require a success roll, and some do not. When rolling for success, the card will specify the number to compare your roll with. And when attempting a skill, you will pay the rule regardless of the outcome. If the skill is successful, it's carried out like it says on the card. But remember, heroes can only use one skill per turn, but can use the skill any number of turns as they wish as long as they have enough rule to do so. Now, in addition to the skills, all heroes have innate abilities according to their race. Their racial ability is listed on the back of their hero card. And these are similar to skills, except they do not require the use of rule to perform them. To activate a racial ability, you will state that you are activating it and state any target that it might apply to if necessary. A racial ability costs 1 turn point, and if using a racial ability, that player cannot perform a physical attack or a skill during that same turn. In addition, each hero also has racial traits. These are passive abilities that affect everything from movement to mitigation to the likelihood of performing a success roll given, certain circumstances. These are not always positive, so be prepared to know what your traits are for your hero. Now, let's get to the enemies. Each enemy will have stats showing their movement, their mitigation, their life. This number under rolls is the number used to determine a success roll for physical attacks or actions. Then this is the number of normal attacks this enemy can perform each turn. If there is a parenthesis, this represents the number of ranged attacks per turn. This number is the range, and in parentheses, it'll mean the number of spaces away that enemy can hit with their ranged attack. And then this is how many times per battle that they can use special named actions that are listed at the bottom of their card. Enemies each have their own trackers, as they can be complex at times, just like the heroes. And this tracker will list their life, the number of actions used, and these trackers are also used for allies to track their stats as well. There is a place for an enemy identifier token. These come in pairs and are used to help differentiate between multiple units of the same enemy. One token is placed next to the miniature on the board, and the other goes to the slot next to their enemy tracker. When controlling an enemy, players will act on their behalf, but they will always need to move to within attack range of the nearest player, and if within range, will attempt an attack. And when attacking enemies, will first attempt to use their action shown at the bottom of their card until they have run out of uses. They will roll a d6 to determine if they're able to use their action, and with the result of either -1, 1, 2, or 3, they will use their action. Otherwise, the action fails and they immediately attempt a physical melee or ranged attack. Some actions might say success roll required, and you will roll the d20 to see if it is below or above the roll value on that card. If there is no text saying success roll required, then the attack happens automatically. The enemy then uses their action regardless of whether they hit or miss. They cannot perform a physical attack on that same turn. To determine damage, if it says base damage, then you will also roll the d6 modifier to increase or decrease that value. If it doesn't state base damage, then you do not roll. If the attempt roll was successful, that counts as one use of that enemy's action, regardless of whether or not the attack was successful. The white peg tracks the number of times that the enemy has performed that text action. If the roll is a failure, then the enemy will immediately perform a physical or a ranged attack, rolling the d20 and the d6 like normal. Enemies that are not ranged attackers will always move to perform melee attacks as quickly as possible. Enemies with only ranged attacks will retreat to the maximum range to attack from. When enemies can perform both attacks, they will move to whichever attack they can perform the most damage with. And enemies will spread out their attacks evenly to all possible targets within their range. Enemies with permaflying will try to drop from flight to fight height against a single target with no others being adjacent. If another moves towards them, they will return back to flight height and move until they can again drop back down to fight height and attack a single target. Enemies will attack heroes and allies in a specific order. They will first choose the closest to them who last successfully melee attacked them, and then the closest hero who's unsuccessfully tried to melee attack them, and then the closest hero to them who last successfully attacked them at a range, and then the closest hero who last unsuccessfully attacked them at range, and then lastly, by the closest viable target. Effects rewards, and rest. There are a good amount of negative effects that can happen against heroes or enemies. Unless otherwise stated, like bleed and poison do, an effect will last for 3 rounds. When given a condition, you will track it by making a stack of 3 tokens of that effect, and at the beginning of each turn, you will discard 1 from each stack. If the condition causes damage, take 1 damage each turn before discarding that token. Only bleed, poison, and burn have cumulative effects, which means 2 times or more damage each round, and this effect will last 3 rounds. If there is a multiplier, put a 2x or a 3x token near your stack so that you can track this. If, for example, the next turn you are hit again with another of the same effect like poison, then you will start a second stack to show that you will have the 1x poison effect for 3 rounds, and then now you have 3 damage between the 2 stacks until the first stack ends. The rulebook will explain what each of these do, but some effects are sleep, poison, paralysis, burn, bleed, knockdown, and affliction, and then you have a positive and a negative effect token to remind you of certain effects in the game. Afflictions also can occur, and it might give you, a specific affliction, or it might be a random affliction, and in that case, you would roll a d6, and the result of that would determine what you are afflicted with. Fatigue is important to factor into the game. You will gain fatigue with different activities that you perform, including entering a new map or switching initiative order. When you gain too much fatigue, you will gain negative effects like having stat modifier cubes placed on the -1 or -2 level, depending on how much fatigue you have obtained. So looking at this track here, 1 to 5 fatigue has no effect. 6 to 8 is moderate fatigue with -1 stat modifiers placed. And 9 through 10 is heavy fatigue with -2 stat modifiers being placed. Beyond 10 fatigue, the hero is forced to rest, and when that happens, this hero cannot participate in battles. At the end of most encounters, you will be directed to gain rewards. The maps might tell you to draw a card from the item deck, increase your maximum life, gain a new skill, or increase a certain stat, but no stats can exceed over 15. After the battle ends and you have gained your rewards, you can now rest and reduce fatigue, recover your rule, and heal. You can choose to forego rest and you'll proceed to the next encounter map if you wish, but if you rest, you can remain on the current map. Rest can be done on most maps and between scenarios, but it is not available on maps which have time limits. And before choosing to rest, players can choose to freely trade items if they so wish. The next decision is deciding if players will be on watch while the other members of their team rest. That player, the player who is on the watch, needs to roll a d6 to perform an alertness check to see if they can manage to stay awake. If that player stays awake, then they don't receive any benefits from resting, but they will be able to mitigate ambushes. If the player fails that roll and falls asleep, then they are considered resting along with the others and receive the resting benefits, but ambushes may occur. Multiple heroes can decide to be on watch at the same rest cycle if they so wish, and each will do their own alertness check if so. This also depends on your fatigue level. With a fatigue of 0 to 3, you don't need to perform an alertness check. With fatigue at 4 to 5, you fall asleep on a roll of -3. Fatigue of 6 through 8, then you fall asleep at a roll of -3 or -2. And with a fatigue of 9 or 10, any minus number causes you to fall asleep. So then after an alertness check is done, one of the resting players will draw a rest card one at a time and can continue drawing or stop when satisfied with the results. Some cards that you will draw might be restful sleep, where everyone rests is reducing their fatigue by 2 or recovering 2 rule and healing 1. Restless sleep reduces fatigue by 1, recovers 1 rule, and no recovery of any health. An ambush card can be drawn, and if no player is on watch, the enemy is placed adjacent to the hero who drew the rest card, and they immediately attack that player. If there is a player on watch, then you get to choose where to place that enemy, and they will not attack until initiative tokens are drawn, and the remaining of the party are then awakened and battle begins. After battle, heroes can then rest as many times as they would like, but the more you rest, the more likely you are to draw another ambush card. But when everyone is satisfied with the rest that they have all received, all miniatures are removed from the current encounter, and the next encounter is unfolded, and all heroes will then gain 1 fatigue again, starting that map. If a hero is forced into rest due to their fatigue, or they suffer damage equal to or greater to their maximum life, then their fatigue is then forced to be set at 10 and are removed from the encounter until the current battle is finished. They will go into forced rest. When this happens, you cannot engage in combat or perform any actions until your party has finished the battle and decide to rest. If someone entered forced rest while on the ocean or the map has a time limit, then you all will need to restart the encounter with all heroes being reset. If all heroes exceed 10 fatigue or are all reduced to 1 life, they will need to replay the current encounter. Reset all heroes to 50% max life and rule and 5 fatigue. There are some special combat circumstances that I'm not going to go over in this video, but you can visit the rulebook. When something special occurs where, you might have some questions, then you can find answers there. Now, a couple things to remember. When playing in the Underlands, it is an inherently dark place. So dark that without a torch or light source, you'll have difficult time seeing at all. Just know that the art is done to help you, navigate through, but you actually do not provide actual light for your heroes. So you will have at times where you have a darkness penalty of -1 to all stat rolls. This can be mitigated if a hero has, a lit torch, a lantern, or another source of light. And if so, a player will need to use both hands for that light source, but it will benefit the entire party. Traps can also be found throughout your adventure, and you can perform a disarm roll using your focus stat. If your roll is less than or equal to your focus stat, then your disarm attempt is successful. If unsuccessful, you will roll the d6 to find out what type of trap that you just triggered. Some other odd snippets here in the game. You might encounter a merchant to barter with, and there is no currency in this game, but there is a value of what you would sell your items for, and then you can look through and find items with equal or lesser value to barter and to gain that item. So it's like a trade with the merchant. You will be playing several scenarios on 24 encounter maps in this first game in the Vrahode system. It's been 30 years in the making, and it will introduce you to the rich lore, unique races, deadly new enemies, and engaging mechanics that make this game system potentially compelling for you. And, well, that's Vrahode, Age of Prophecy. I hope that gives you an idea of what your battles might be like in this game. If you have any questions, please leave them below. I will try to answer them the best that I can. Again, Brody here with Let's Table It, where we get games to the table. Please like and subscribe to our channel. We're working hard to bring to you videos like this one, so you know if these games here are ones that you want to get to your own table.